Good day, beloveds. Welcome to the program on a trip to Bethlehem, where we look at the Christmas story as our story. Yesterday, we dealt with the introduction, we dealt with the framework, we dealt with the story of Christmas and what it means metaphysically and why this journey is important. Today, we're going to get into the program in a significant way. And today we start with stage one, which is renunciation, weakening the ego. So that is the first stage of getting into this program. But before we begin, I just want us to be centered in prayer. So I invite you to go with him. To simply relax in the peace within. To inspire us, to open our hearts into the learnings that will take place through this program. Thank you, Spirit, for divine ideas that are being birthed, that are unfolding perfectly through us. And thank you for this powerful journey of a trip to Bethlehem, a journey of knowing and realizing that the Christmas story is our story. It is a process of spiritual growth, spiritual unfoldment. And we give thanks that we can be at one with the story of Christ, the birthing of Christ, the birthing of the God presence within each of us. Thank you, Spirit, for being with us. Thank you for leading us. And thank you that everything is unfolding in a divine and perfect way. And so it is. Amen. So we then move ahead into the presentation. Again, it's a presentation that really gives an overview of what we need to cover today. And we've got plus minus 13 slides to go through. So let's just put that on full screen mode. So trip to Bethlehem, renunciation, weakening egocentricity, stage one. So this is the very first stage out of the 12 of this trip to Bethlehem. Now, yesterday when we started the program, I highlighted that we are setting an intention with this program. And the affirmation for this program is as follows, and you can read it with me. My life continues to unfold in a perfect and magnificent way. I am an expression of wisdom, health, and abundance. Divine love is doing its perfect work in and through me, and I invoke the power of Spirit within me. So that is the affirmation that anchors us, that sets the intention for what we want to achieve with this program. Moving right along, we then get into we then get into the stage itself, the step one itself of the power of renunciation. And it's important to start by emphasizing that yesterday what we did with understanding the metaphysics, the metaphysical meaning of the various elements of this program was really just the preparation process. So we needed to understand the terms, the places, the people that are part of this trip to Bethlehem. So that was the preparation process. But preparation, when you prepare for a journey, you have not yet, stating the obvious, you have not yet been, participated in that journey. So it's important, it was important for us to yesterday really just to make sure that we get our bearings and we understand the many elements that we're going to deal with. But today, power of renunciation is the power of release. It's one of the 12 powers. In fact, those who are in Unity South Africa Johannesburg Unity Center of Love and Light would know that on the 11th month, we deal with the power of renunciation, the power of release, the power of letting go, and really setting free that which needs to be released in your life. And in the context of the story, here today we are dealing with releasing the ego. You'll recall that the metaphysical meaning of King Herod is our ego sense. So the power of release or getting into this stage of renunciation, it's really all about becoming aware of our egocentric traits, to really reflect and say, what are some of those patterns in my ego that may be in the way of my learning process? So this stage is about the awareness of our own characteristic that could block our journey. It is about us keeping our sense of self or our habitual coping mechanisms at bay so that we can then continue and grow through this journey. So the power of release, of releasing egocentricity, it's really about taking a moment, pausing, and just knowing to ourselves what are some of your own individual characteristics that could really prevent us from being receptive to this journey of growth. So the power of release then fulfills that role as we move on. Yeah. As we move on with this process. So what will today's process entail? We're going to really look at 5 areas, as you can see on the screen. One, we will get into the 4 ego types. So here, the point here is for you to see the descriptions and identify what could be my own ego type. Maybe you relate to more than one ego type. That's perfectly okay. But the idea here is to look at the descriptions of the 4 ego types and say, 1 or 2 appear to be what could be my ego type. So that's where we'll start. We will then spend time looking at the impact of a functional or dysfunctional family, because our families, or what is familiar, influences how we then become, how we relate to the world. So for example, if you are from a functional family where you are loved, where you are given that confidence, that leeway to grow and develop, you may have a healthy self-esteem, sense of connection with other people. Whereas if you are from a dysfunctional family where you were attacked, where you felt unsafe, that may influence how you relate to the world. So understanding those dynamics, we then get into the 3rd element, which is the coping roles. And with coping roles, it's really about how the family background, family experience is informing how you cope or the roles that you adopt into your life. So if you're from a functional family and you were treated well with love, the way you cope with the world, it's probably more of a positive demeanor, positive outlook, being able to connect and interact with people. Whereas if you come from an extreme dysfunctional family, you may be influenced somewhat negatively in how you relate to other people. But of course, I mean, this is really ways for you to reflect. You may be from a dysfunctional family, but relate well with people. It's not to say it's cast in stone. It's really just to stimulate those ideas, those reflections, to say, how was my family situation and how could it be affecting me in a negative or positive way in how I relate to the world, or in my ego type, my mask, my persona into the world. So that's the importance of looking at family, and then how we then cope with life and relating to people. And then the last two elements, it's really then the practical part. So once you've identified one or two ego types, and you've identified the coping roles that may be at play in your life or through your ego, you then are going to apply denials to release those characteristics, or to not let them bind you, to really just be open to releasing them. If you do need to release them, we'll use the denial to do that, and the affirmation to replace, to reaffirm the characteristics that we want to have in place now into this journey. And then the final part is really a tip, if when you have time, to apply the burning bowl. It's really where you take some of your negative experiences, some of what you've observed as a negative trait. You then acknowledge that for yourself, you reflect on it, you enter a prayerful state. And then once what you've written down, you release through the burning bowl, which is a process of burning whatever you would have listed as something to release. So that is a process really of clearing the energy and making way for the new, empowered, more receptive self to come through. So let us look at the 4 ego types. The first one is the clinging vine. The second one is the star. The third one is the tyrant, or Nero. Nero, in the Roman times, was a Roman leader, Roman king who persecuted the Christians. So this ego type, it really refers to someone who's then tyrannical in the approach, the Nero. So it's the tyrant, or Nero. That's the third ego type. The last ego type is the turtle. Let us get into each one of them individually. So the clinging vine, which is the first ego type, it's the kind of ego or persona where an individual believes that they please other people by being helpless. So this is the victim. And when I take the victim mode, and people see that I'm a victim, that is displaying the characteristics of the clinging vine. The clinging vine also would be the ego type where one believes that there must be some reliable, mighty person, institution, government, Jesus Christ to come and save me. The clinging vine, it's really about the power being out there, and I need an external intervention to take care of me. That is the clinging vine personality, where I don't take responsibility, but I outsource and depend on forces externally to be a solution for my situation. The clinging vine ego type often gains attention by being miserable, by talking about their suffering, their problems, and someone else must solve their problems for them. So that is the first personality type, the clinging. That's the first ego type, I beg your pardon, the clinging vine. The second ego type is the star. I need to shine. I need to get others to notice, to admire me, to like me. I use my cleverness to be the star, to shine. I use my charm. I use my presence. And that then becomes how I relate to the world, or everything that I receive, by being a star and really appearing as perfect, and, a person who gets things done. So that's the second ego type of being a star. The third ego type is the tyrant. Now, the tyrant must attack. So their ego type approach is that, they have a feeling that people around them are uncaring. So they believe that they must pester, they must threaten, that they can behave violently, verbally or physically to get what they want. So they must dominate the situation and get control because people around them are uncaring. And therefore they need to apply themselves in tyrannical way. So that's the third ego type. The fourth ego type is the turtle. So the turtle is, imagine a turtle, slow, it's overwhelmed by the harshness of life. It's hopeless. It accepts whatever situation that's at play, and they give up asking for what they want. So they simply shrink into their shell. That would be the turtle. And the ego type of the turtle attempts to control the world by simply ignoring it, just getting into that shell and you know uh, using this using the approach of ignoring the world, um, and being left alone as a way of relating to the world. So with this, um, these are the four archetypes that are included in the book. And perhaps you can then reflect for yourself if any of these kind of sound like you, no judgment. This is a completely individual process. And, each one of us should really take a moment and say, can I relate to one or two of them? Could that ego type um, be at play as I'm learning? Where am I being a turtle? Where am I being a star? Where am I being a tyrant? Where am I being a clinging vine? So those dynamics are also at play. Now let's look at impact of family. Now, the book somewhat takes, I suppose, a simplistic way of describing a family, which is either functional or dysfunctional. And of course, we all know that, things are complex. They're not always as cut and dry, depending on individuals' circumstances. So I've listed the characteristics there where if you say yes, then it's potentially functional scenario of a family. And then when it's a no, it's probably dysfunctional. So for example, when you grew up, was there unconditional love? Or did you feel loved in a really wonderful way from your parents, your guardians, or people that really were looking after you? So if yes, then that would be a sign of a potentially functional family. And if no, then potentially dysfunctional, potentially. Where boundaries set, boundaries about life, what you do, how you are to be honored, treated. What were the boundaries like? If you had specific needs for the family, things to be respected, were they respected? In a functional family, if the boundaries have been set and everyone is in agreement, yes, then they would be respected. No, then it could potentially be a dysfunctional scenario. Did you feel safe? Did you feel safe from your siblings? Did you feel safe from your parents? Did you feel safe from people around you? So in a functional family, the answer is likely to be yes. In a dysfunctional family, the answer is likely to be no. Were the rules that are set in the house reasonable? And when they were crossed, were they enforced with love? If yes, you were probably in a functional family. If no, potentially the other way. Were the adults reliable and present? Where you as a child be able to freely express your thoughts and feelings. So this is the reflection that you then need to do and think, was I in the main in a functional family or in a dysfunctional family? And and how, and this is the point of this exercise, how is this then informing the type of person or ego type that I'm presenting into the world? How do I relate to the world because of the functionality or dysfunctionality of my family? Now, the book suggests that depending on whether the family was functional or dysfunctional, we then adopt coping roles into society. So these are also forms of ego. These are forms of the King Herods that could come into play as we are going through a learning exercise. So the first coping role is family hero. So if this person is from a dysfunctional family, for example, they want to exhibit concern because they felt maybe they were not cared for. So a person can then adopt a family hero mentality coming from a dysfunctional family. But likewise, they can take a family hero mentality coming from a functional family, because this is the life or the standards that they're expecting. So then they become a family hero in their thinking, in their ego type. So for them, they must exhibit concern for other people, they must achieve more, they must show visible success. But at times, and this is what they need to be careful of, is that they whether or not they are inwardly feeling inadequate. And so that could come up, for example, from someone who was from a dysfunctional family who didn't get the enough love or attention, and then they use the family hero approach in order to, to feel adequate. But this is really just to reflect on what's possible, what's possible for you. Let's look at the second category, which is the scapegoat. The scapegoat feels inadequate, feels withdrawn, and the scapegoat would demand attention through disruptive behavior. So I am from this family. I just, my how I feel about myself, I just was not nurtured. The love that I got just didn't, make me feel good about who I am. So I feel inadequate. I feel withdrawn. And whenever I have a chance, I will apply disruptive methods in order to get the attention. So that would be the coping role, of a scapegoat, coping role or ego type. The third category is lost child. Now, lost child is about withdrawing from conflict. Lost child has difficulty making friends. Lost child is lonely. Lost child feels unimportant. And lost child has a very little sense of identity. They're lost. So so this would be a coping mechanism also that's influenced potentially from your experiences from family, or how you experience the world as you were in your formative age. And then the final category is the mascot. The mascot, the mascot, the term refers to it, just, taking this image or this character, so they please people by being funny. They're compulsive clowns. We're serious about an issue, they crack a joke, but, in a disruptive and at times inappropriate manner. And that's why this becomes, so it's a coping mechanism, in other words. So cracking a joke or a funny comment, it's not a problem within itself, but when it is compulsive and it's a way of finding importance or relevance, then potentially it could be referring to this ego type. The mascots tend to be hyperactive and short attention span. Let's move on. Let's do something else. And so these coping roles often then arise from the experience, or how we've experienced life as we were developing through our families, whether they were functional or dysfunctional. So why is this important to reflect on? And the book makes quite a profound comparison, you know, of Jesus the Christ dealing with um, temptations of egocentricity. And they refer to the temptations of the Christ. And you'll recall that after John baptized Jesus, the Christ, Jesus then withdrew and went into a period of fasting in the wilderness where Jesus spent time, really 40 days, just being in that space of silence, fasting, and prayer. Now, coming out of that, there was then the challenge around egocentricity. And the Matthew 4, verses 1 to 11 tells that story of the temptations. So, and this now relates to what we've just been doing, that what the three temptations could be linked directly with the ego types we discussed. One of the temptations was that you are hungry, turn these stones to bread. So in other words, be the turtle. You're not safe where you are. Do something to be able to be okay by yourself. You can turn these stones and survive for yourself. So in other words, take the turtle ego type. So that is one way that our Christ nature could be challenged, and where we take a metaphysical story or example and we show how it can play out in our own consciousness and through our ego. So that's the first temptation, which deals with overcoming our own egocentricity. The second example is, stand on top of the temple and jump, and if the Lord is there, you'll be saved. So, in other words, do a spectacular public display, be the star. So that is the ego temptation that is being talked about in this story of the temptations of Christ. The last example of overcoming egocentricity from that allegory is bow down to me. And if when you do, you can have dominion, you can rule over the world. And in other words, you can then be the tyrant, you can be the dictator, everyone can bow down to you. So that is showing how Jesus the Christ in a practical way had to overcome their own egocentricity or ego nature. So that would be how, as metaphysical students, we would look at a specific story and how Jesus the Christ, as our way shower, as our big brother, overcame his own egocentricity, which is the challenge that is being put before you. So, as we bring this video to an end, it's important to reflect, to go through this presentation, and I will also attach it as a separate attachment when I send it to you. But it's important to reflect and say, what is my ego type, or what are some of the characteristics that I display, and how could those be limitations into my journey of life or of this learning process? It's important to know potentially why do you have or prefer those egocentricity traits or characteristics. So the reflection is very important as we begin this stage. And a practical way of doing this is to take down your notes, journal, and identify what could be some of those egocentricity traits or limitations or chains that might be at play. And it's again, I want to emphasize, it's not a judgment. It's really observing, oh, that's interesting. But why am I why is this a trait that's playing out in my life? What could be influencing it? What is the reward of me possessing this trait? And that kind of reflection is important. Which ego type sounds like, is what I display, and where do these traits play out? Where are they predominant? Am I there's a star in every situation? Am I a tyrant? Where am I a turtle? And those reflections are important. And why is this the case? And what is the reward? And am I open to releasing those traits as I go through this process? So that is the way of overcoming, through journaling, through self query, through reflecting and writing down how these ego traits or ego types are playing out in your own life. And then the next step is then to write a denial. Now, as Unity students, we know that we use denials and affirmations. We deny that which we want to erase, so the denial that you will use after you've identified the ego trait is that the thoughts, feelings, beliefs, and attitude of me being a family hero are powerless over my Christ self. So that is the first denial, an example of a denial. Let's take another one. The thoughts, the feelings, beliefs, and attitude of me being a lost child are powerless over my Christ self. So that is the denial. So pick one or two ego traits or coping roles and apply that denial. And then you've got a second option of a denial. You can say, I reject the rule of being a clinging vine over my consciousness. I reject the rule of being a scapegoat over my consciousness. So you start with the denial of the ego trait that you've identified as your characteristic. And then you don't leave it there. Through a denial, you've erased, or you are in the process of erasing the characteristic or the ego trait that is at play in your life. Once you have used the denial, you then want to replace, rewrite the scripture, the script in your life. So and the suggestion there for an affirmation is that I am a spiritual being in a spiritual universe guided by spiritual laws. God is the only presence and power in me and my life. So we are affirming the presence, the higher self, as being the reality and the truth of your life, overcoming this ego trait that you have identified. So that is the first exercise, using denials and affirmations. This is the last process, the second and the last process. So many of you who've been with Unity know that once a year we do the burning bowl ceremony. And this is really the same principle, where you sit, you reflect, you look at everything that came up for you as you are reflecting on the ego types, all the limitations or the experiences, anything that needs to be let go. And in this specific instance, the ego traits that may be an obstacle in your learning journey. You get into silence or a prayerful mind, and you really silently to yourself repeat the words that, I now release the thoughts, the feelings, and attitude that caused me to be a tyrant. just by way of example. And you then sit in that silence, simply playing or allowing thoughts of releasing feelings and beliefs or attitudes or demeanors around an ego type. And then the next step is to affirm to yourself that I release these errors, I lose them, I let them go, and I let God have God's perfect way with them, with all these limitations. And you can then take the next step of just writing down everything that you want to release, write them on a piece of paper. And once you feel complete in writing those limiting thoughts, beliefs, ego traits, once you feel really complete that this is really what needs to be released in terms of my, egocentricity or ego traits, you then sit in the silence. And when possible, you can simply go to a safe space where you can, light a match and burn that paper. So often, preferable to do it outside where, in a safe space to be able to burn that paper. And you look at it and you really let that emulating fire to burn and release and transform those limitations that you've identified for yourself. And you may also affirm to yourself that divine love now consumes these errors, this error thinking, and I thank God for freedom and power of release. So this is a process you can follow when you do the burning bowl. It is a process that can be done at any point. I do realize this is a 12-day program, so you don't need to do it as 2 days exercise, but you can do it when you do have time over the next 12 days to really just sit and reflect what needs to be burned, what needs to be released, ego traits and other aspects that need to be released. And then you can close the session with an empowering prayer. So folks, that is it, beloveds. That's the end of the notes. But I want to close the session by doing a prayer, the identity prayer. I got this prayer from Centers for Spiritual Living. And the prayer simply says, and maybe just take both of your hands and put them over your heart space. The identity prayer. I know that within myself is a life which is perfect, complete, and divine. It was never born, it cannot die, for it lives and it is God. Within myself is a wholeness, peace, poise, and power of life. This life is health, it's abundance, it is love. There is one life, it is the life of God. And this is my life now. And so it is. Amen. So that's it, beloveds. Thank you for taking time to listen to the video. And I welcome your comments, your questions. And when we have our next face-to-face interaction, we can then unpack, clarify, or address some of the issues that perhaps you may have come across. Have a blessed day, and God bless you. Lots of love.